Studying prophecies in Isaiah can be challenging, but I think we can come to understand them a little bit better by recognizing how they can be fulfilled in multiple ways and by considering their ancient Near Eastern context. Even today, prophets receive revelation that can take on different meaning for various audiences and time periods. For example, in 2018, President Russell M. Nelson said, "If you think the church has been fully restored, you're just seeing the beginning. There is much more to come. Wait till next year and the next year. Eat your vitamin pills, get your rest. It's going to be exciting." When I first heard this in 2018, I naturally assumed that it was referring to the many changes President Nelson was making in the church. However, in 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic affected the world, this admonition to get vitamins and get rest all of a sudden started to take some ironic new meaning for me. The prophecies in Isaiah also may have taken on different meanings for different audiences. The first half of Isaiah is filled with a lot of prophecies about the impending destruction of Israel and the surrounding nations for their wickedness. In Isaiah chapter 13, Isaiah prophesied that Babylon would ultimately be destroyed for their wickedness. Isaiah 13 explains, "Behold, I will stir up the Medes against them. Their bows also shall dash the young men to pieces, and they shall have no pity on the fruit of the womb. Their eye shall not spare children. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees' excellency, shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah." This passage describes how total and complete Babylon's destruction would be. The Medes would be the ones to destroy Babylon, and they would take no mercy, slaughter all the men, women, and children, and the annihilation would be as devastating as that of the legendary Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, on a symbolic level, readers can look at this chapter and see how Babylon could be a symbol for the world and for wickedness in general. Those who are wicked will ultimately see God's justice. But for an ancient Israelite, their immediate context might lead them to interpret this passage differently. Later Israelites returning from exile in Babylon could have read this passage and seen it fulfilled in Persia's conquest of Babylon in 539 BC. The Medes were part of the Persian Empire at this point, and King Cyrus's conquering of Babylon allowed exiled Israel to return to their homeland. However, even though there was a military campaign involved, it seems that Persia didn't obliterate the city of Babylon in quite the way that Isaiah 13 described. The Persians' takeover was relatively peaceful, and Cyrus seemed to be a comparatively tolerant ruler. So it's possible that ancient Israelites at that time saw this as either a symbolic or an embellished description of what the Persian Empire did to Babylon. But there's also another destruction of Babylon that may flesh out our understanding of this picture a little bit. In 689 BC, so 100 years before the Persian conquest and closer to Isaiah's time, the city of Babylon was completely sacked and demolished. But instead of the destruction coming from the Persians, it was from the Assyrians. King Sennacherib boasted about this event. "Like the onset of a storm I swept, and like a fog I enveloped it. I laid siege to that city. I left no one. I made its devastation greater than that of the flood, so that in future days the site of that city, its temples, and its gods would not be identifiable. I completely destroyed it with water and annihilated it like inundated territory." This description seems to resonate well with what Isaiah described in chapter 13. So with this in mind, it's possible that Isaiah's prophecy was referring to the Persian conquest or the Assyrian destruction, or possibly a little bit of both. These two conquests together could have represented Babylon's total destruction over a period of time. And this is just one example of how we can look at ancient prophecy from multiple perspectives and come out with new insights. Isaiah 13 was likely interpreted differently by Israelites depending on their time period and their situation. In the Book of Mormon, Nephi included Isaiah 13 in his selection of Isaiah chapters because he believed that these prophecies had meaning to his own people, even though Babylon's destruction was far removed from Nephi's family in both time and space. Nephi seems to have reapplied the prophecy of Babylon to all nations and people who disobey the commandments of God. Nephi previously saw a panoramic vision of the Nephites being destroyed due to their wickedness, and perhaps he saw his own people in the characterization of Babylon. Nephi also beheld the end of days when the wicked nations of the earth were destroyed. He could have seen Isaiah's prophecies applying both to the destruction of his people and the conflicts preceding the second coming. Nephi knew firsthand how large-scale wickedness could cause devastating physical and spiritual destruction. We can similarly study prophecies in Isaiah and find personal meaning by applying them to the patterns that we see in our day, as long as we recognize the prophecy's original context and meaning for its ancient audience. When we view prophecy from both its ancient lens and its modern one, we can see how God can speak to us across generations and in various circumstances to teach us eternal truths. As we do our best to listen to the counsel of the prophet and the Holy Spirit in our day, we will be prepared to face the spiritual challenges ahead.